Good morning, everybody. So, how is everybody doing this morning? Okay, so in the previous session, we were discussing about the regional division of Himalayas, right? So, we have discussed about the Western Himalayas. So, we have discussed that the Western Himalayas can be divided into Kashmir Himalayas, Himachal Himalayas, and Kumaon Himalayas. And we have discussed about Kashmir Himalayas and Himachal Himalayas. So now we have to discuss about Kumaon Himalayas. After Kumaon, we'll move on to Central Himalayas and then Eastern Himalayas. Okay, guys? So, the Kumaon Himalayas. Okay? So, Western Himalayas can be divided into Kashmir Himalayas, Himachal Himalayas, and Kumaon Himalayas. So, we already discussed Kashmir and Himachal. So, now we are going to discuss about Kumaon Himalayas. Okay? Now, Kumaon Himalayas are situated in Uttarakhand and they extend from Sutlej River to the Kali River. So, we have seen where Kali River is, right? In the previous session, Kali River flows along the western border of Nepal with India. Okay? So, Sutlej River. Where is Sutlej? Indus, Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Sutlej. So, here we have Sutlej. So, Kumaon Himalayas extend from Sutlej River to the Kali River. Kali River is situated here. Okay? And its main peaks are Nanda Devi, Kamet, Trishul, and Badrinath. Now, the Gangotri Glacier, the source of the sacred Ganga, is present in this region, Kumaon Himalayas. The lesser Himalayas in the Kumaon Himalayas are represented by the Mussoorie and Nagtiba ranges. Okay? So, middle Himalayas in the Kumaon region. So, what ranges of middle Himalayas we have in the Kumaon region? We have the Mussoorie and Nagtiba ranges. And then this area has the famous Nainital Lake. So, this is the Nainital Lake. Okay, guys, simple, right? So, Kumaon Himalayas are part of Western Himalayas. And Kumaon Himalayas extend from Sutlej River to the Kali River. And we know where Kali River is, right? Kali River is situated at the western border of Nepal with India. Now, what are the main mountains of Kumaon Himalayas? Nanda Devi, Kamet, Trishul, and Badrinath. Okay, and all these are situated in Uttarakhand. Now, the Gangotri Glacier is part of Kumaon Himalayas. Obviously, we all know this, right? And then, what about the Middle Himalayas? When you speak about Middle Himalayas, you have the Mussoorie and Nagtiba ranges in Uttarakhand as part of Kumaon Himalayas. And then the area also has the famous Nainital Lake. Clear, right? Now, the Shivaliks in this region are about 900 to 1000 meters high and they run from the south of the Mussoorie range. Okay? Between the Ganga and the Yamuna rivers. So, Shivaliks in Kumaon Himalayas region are about 900 to 1000 meters high. That means not very high. And they run to the south of the Mussoorie range. Obviously, like first you have Shivaliks and then Middle Himalayas and then Greater Himalayas, right? Okay. So, Shivaliks are found to the south of Mussoorie range between the Ganga and Yamuna rivers. Okay. Now, the flat valleys between the lesser Himalayas and the Shivalik ranges are called dunes or dunes, of which Dune Valley is the most famous. This is where Dehradun is located. And we have discussed about the formation of dunes, right? Clear? So, any doubts anybody has still here, please ask me. So, already we have discussed about the formation of dunes. Okay? So, there are flat valleys between Middle Himalayas and the Shivalik ranges. Those flat valleys are called dunes. So, how did these flat valleys form in the first place? So Shivaliks formed at the end after the formation of Greater Himalayas and Middle Himalayas. So by the time Shivaliks formed, already many rivers and streams were flowing from the Greater Himalayas and the Middle Himalayas. So when Shivaliks formed, they barricaded or they obstructed the course of these rivers. So huge lakes formed. And these lakes were filled with sediments brought by the rivers coming from the Greater Himalayas and the Middle Himalayas. So all the lakes were filled with sediments. Now, finally, the river running water is a powerful erosional force. So the running water cut through the Shivaliks, all the lakes were drained, but the sediments were left behind. And that is how dunes or duns formed. Clear? Now, with this, we are done with the Western Himalayas. Okay? So, under Western Himalayas, we have discussed about Kashmir Himalayas, okay, and then Himachal Himalayas and Kumaon Himalayas. So, now let us move on to the second regional division of Himalayas, which is the Central Himalayas, also called Nepal Himalayas. So, there are multiple names in different websites, in different textbooks. So, that is the reason I included both the names. The Central Himalayas or the Nepal Himalayas. The Central Himalayas stretch for a distance of about 800 kilometers between River Kali in the west and River Teesta in the east. Again, we know where River Kali is, right? River Kali forms the border between Nepal and India. The western boundary of Nepal with India is River Kali. So, between River Kali in the west and River Teesta in the east, we have the Central Himalayas or the Nepal Himalayas. Now, the Great Himalayan Range, that means the outermost, Great Himalayas, Middle Himalayas, and Shivaliks. So, the Great Himalayan Range attains the maximum height in this region. Okay? So, some of the most famous mountains like Mount Everest, Mount Kanchenjunga, Makalu, Annapurna, Dhaulagiri are all located here as part of the Great Himalayan Range. Okay? Now, in between the Great and Lesser Himalayas, that means in between the Great Himalayas and the Middle Himalayas, we have the valleys of Kathmandu and Pokhara. Okay? So, in between the Great and Lesser Himalayas, there are Kathmandu and Pokhara valleys, and Kathmandu Valley contains the city of Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal. Okay? Now, the Shivalik range comes very close to the Lesser Himalayas towards the east of Central Himalayas. The Shivalik range comes very close to the Middle Himalayas and is almost non-existent beyond the Gandak River. Okay? So guys, it is very difficult for me to include the maps of all these rivers. So you have to locate all these rivers in map. Okay? So try to have an atlas, and when you listen to this class again, just have an atlas with you, and looking at the atlas, just try to find out all these rivers in map. Then it will be very, very clear, because it is too difficult for me to find all those images, and I cannot include all the maps, all the images of all the rivers. Okay, I hope you understand. So kindly have an atlas with you the next time you watch this video. So very simple. Where are Central Himalayas located? Between Kali River in the west and Teesta River in the east. Simple. Now, the Great Himalayan Range attains maximum height in this region, Central Himalayas or Nepal Himalayas. Where is Mount Everest present? Mount Everest is present at the boundary between Nepal and China. Okay. So, and apart from that, where is Mount Kanchenjunga present? At the border between Sikkim and Nepal. Okay. So, the Central Himalayas, they contain some of the highest mountains in the world. The Great Himalayan Range attains the maximum height in this region. Done? Now, in between the Greater and Lesser Himalayas, we have the Kathmandu and Pokhara valleys. Simple, and we all know how these valleys formed. The Shivalik range comes very close to the Lesser Himalayas, towards the east. That means the Shivaliks will converge with the Middle Himalayas, towards the east of the Central Himalayas. And it is almost non-existent beyond the Gandak River. Okay? Next, the last division of Himalayas is the Eastern Himalayas or Assam Himalayas. Again, in some textbooks, some websites, you will find the name Assam Himalayas. In some websites, you'll find the name Eastern Himalayas. So that is the reason I included both the names. Okay, the Eastern or Assam Himalayas. So this part of Himalayas lies between the Teesta River in the west and the Brahmaputra River in the east. Okay. The Eastern Himalayas occupy mainly the areas of Arunachal Pradesh and Bhutan. That's it. These points are more than enough about the Eastern Himalayas. Clear, right? So with this, we are done with the concept of regional division of Himalayas. Just have an atlas with you and watch this video again and try to locate all the rivers, and then you'll understand this concept in a crystal clear way. Okay, guys? So actually, it is better for you to have atlas ready with you from the next class, because right now we are discussing Indian geography, right? So I'll be telling you the names of many places, and sometimes it might become too confusing, like so many places, so many locations, you have to remember all those names. So if you have some visual cues, it becomes easy. So kindly have an atlas ready with you from the next class. Okay? Now, significance of Himalayas. How important Himalayas are. The Himalayas are the most dominating geographical feature of India. Don't you think so? Yes, we have the peninsular plateau. Yes, we have the large Great Plain of northern India. We also have the eastern coastal and western coastal plain. We have all these things. But they are also important. I'm not saying no. But of all the physiographic features of India, Himalayas are the most dominating. Okay, what do you mean by dominating? They're like the most important, most prominent, okay, most special. Now, just look at this point. No other mountain range anywhere in the world has affected the life of people and shaped the destiny of a nation as Himalayas have done for India. Okay, so now let us look at the various roles or the various effects of Himalayas. First, climatic influence. The Himalayas play a very important role in influencing the climate of India. How? First, they have high altitude and great length. We all know that Himalayas stretch in the form of an arc for almost 2,400 kilometers. Okay? So, due to their high altitude and great length, they act as a barricade to the summer monsoon winds and causes precipitation. Okay, so the Himalayas, they act as an obstruction to the southwest monsoon winds. The southwest monsoon winds will strike the Himalayas and then cause orographic rainfall. So that is one of the reasons why Cherrapunji in Meghalaya is the wettest place on the planet. Okay, now they also prevent the cold continental air masses of Central Asia from entering into India. Now, Central Asia is a huge, vast land area, and during winter, the continent becomes very cold. So, that is the meaning of continentality, right? So, areas that are located in the interior of the continent, they become very cold during winter, and in summer, they become very hot. There's going to be extremities in temperature. Now, the Central Asian landmass during winter becomes very, very, very cold, bitter cold, extremely cold. So, cold air masses form over Central Asia, and these cold air masses will try to come towards the south, but Himalayas block them. Okay, if there were no Himalayas, the winters would have been very severe under the influence of cold air masses coming from Central Asia. So, the whole of North India would suffer a lot due to the very severe winter caused by very cold air masses that formed over Central Asia during winter. But fortunately, Himalayas are blocking those air masses. Clear? So, guys, about this point, we are going to understand more when we discuss the monsoon mechanism. So, right now, just don't worry about that. First, let me finish off all the physiographic divisions. And then we'll speak about the reverse drainage system, that is very, very important. And after discussing the drainage system, then we'll speak about the climate of India. And then we'll discuss about the monsoon mechanism. And then we can discuss about the different soils in India. And then we can discuss about the different agroclimatic zones, the agriculture, and then the various mineral resources of India. Okay. So, next, defense. The Himalayas have been protecting India from outside invaders since ancient times. But again, 1962 Chinese aggression towards India. So the Himalayan mountains proved to be not so useful because Chinese were able to cross the Himalayas and occupy the Aksai Chin region. But you can still say that in spite of advancement of modern warfare, in spite of emergence of new technologies like drones and all that, the defense significance of Himalayas cannot be ignored altogether. It is still a very difficult terrain. It is still a very difficult region to pass through. The mountain passes are very high. Oxygen is less. The temperatures are very severe, extreme cold. And you can easily get lost in those mountains. Okay? So, in spite of advancement of modern technology, in spite of now becoming very easy, like to cross through Himalayas, we cannot simply ignore the defense importance of Himalayas altogether. They still offer some formidable barrier. Okay. Next, source of rivers. This we all know, right? Gangotri Glacier, Yamunotri Glacier. Most of the greatest rivers of India, I said most, not all, because even in South India we have Godavari, Krishna, which are very great rivers. Even Narmada, Tapi. So most of the greatest rivers of India have their origin in the Himalayan ranges. Abundant and vast snowfields and vast glaciers feed the mighty rivers of India. Okay? The Himalayan rivers, along with their hundreds of tributaries, form the very basis of life in the whole of North India. So, without Himalayan rivers and their tributaries, do you think the Indo-Gangetic Plain would have formed? Absolutely not. So, the formation of Indo-Gangetic Plain and providing drinking water to some millions and millions of people, providing employment to fishermen, okay, and not only that, these rivers have cultural and religious significance, okay, and they also help in producing hydropower. So, the benefits from these Himalayan rivers is countless. So that is the reason. The Himalayan rivers, along with their hundreds of tributaries, form the very basis of life in the whole of North India. Okay. So most of you are from North India, right? Do you disagree with this statement? Abhishek, if Himalayas would not have been there, India would have faced major variations in seasons. See, actually, India is close to equator, right? So, India is within the tropical zone. So, India would only experience two seasons. Okay, the hot season and the cold season, and somewhere in the middle, there's going to be a wet season. Okay, so I don't think there'll be much variations in seasons, but there's going to be much variation in temperatures during the seasons if Himalayas were not there. As I told you before, winters would have been very severe, very extreme, due to the cold continental air masses moving towards the south. Okay? Now, fertile soil. The great rivers and their tributaries carry enormous quantities of alluvium, some millions of tons of alluvium, while descending from the Himalayas. This is deposited in the Great Plains of North India, making the plains one of the most fertile lands in the world. Now, just to get this point, you'll be amazed. It is estimated that the Ganges and the Indus carry millions of tons of silt every single day, not every week, every month, or every year. Every single day, the Ganges and Indus carry millions of tons of fertile silt, which is being deposited on the Indo-Gangetic Plain. And again, some of it is being carried and deposited into the oceans. And the silt carried by Brahmaputra is even more. Okay, so fertile soil, very, very important. Next, hydroelectricity. The Himalayan region offers several places which can be used for producing hydropower. So we are going to discuss about this in detail when we discuss that topic separately. Okay. So we are going to discuss about the various mines and minerals, the location of various industries, location of various hydro power projects. So just don't worry about this. Next, forest wealth. The Himalayan ranges are very rich in forest resources. As the altitude increases, the vegetation changes from tropical to alpine. We all know this, right? At the lower elevations, the vegetation is tropical. In the middle elevations, the vegetation is temperate. And beyond that, the vegetation is alpine. Okay. And beyond that, you find alpine meadows. What do you mean by alpine meadows? Alpine meadows exist between the tree line and the snow line. So just imagine this as a mountain. So till here you have snow. So this is snow line. Until here trees can go. So this is tree line. In the middle you have alpine meadows. When you say meadows, you are referring to large areas covered by grasses and very short soft plants. What do you mean by soft? They don't have any wood. Okay. So meadows means large areas covered by soft grassy vegetation. As simple as that. So tree line, alpine meadows, and then snow line. So at the lower elevations and at the foothills, you find tropical forest. And then you go a little bit more high, then you start finding temperate vegetation. A bit more high, you start finding alpine vegetation. A bit more high, alpine meadows, and then snow line. So temperate vegetation and alpine forests are actually both same. They are coniferous forest. Okay? And in some areas you might find mixed forest. Both broadleaf and coniferous forest mixed together. So it all depends on the elevation, it all depends on the slope, it all depends on the rainfall, it all depends on the severity of cold or heat. There are so many variation factors. Okay? So Kusum, you're having some problem in geography, you're not understanding how to revise. Very simple. All you have to do is just go through these PPTs once. Okay? And then try to attempt previous year questions. That is very important. Go through all these PPTs and also read some standard textbooks. Okay, you can go for Majid Hussain. Okay, Indian Geography by Majid Hussain. The climatology, oceanography, and geomorphology. Whatever handouts I gave you, that is more than enough. Okay. Apart from that, you can go for G.C. Leong book. Okay. For general geography, for learning the concepts. For Indian geography, you go for Majid Hussain. And apart from that, I'm giving you a lot of content. Okay, so even this is useful. So all you have to do is just keep revising this once or twice. Maybe if you revise once, you won't be able to remember anything. That is totally fine. Don't get worried. Don't get discouraged. Okay. All you have to do is keep revising once or twice or thrice. And then try to attempt as many previous year questions as you can. Try to attempt as many model questions as you can. Then trust me, nobody can defeat you. Okay. So revision is nothing but going through this and attempting questions. That's it. That is the meaning of revision. Like for example, in 2018 or 19, I don't remember clearly, in GS1 of mains, you got a question about mantle plumes. And we have discussed mantle plumes in geomorphology. So why don't you just answer that question? Okay, answer writing is very, very important. And just keep one thing in mind. You're not preparing for prelims separately and mains separately. If you do that, then you cannot crack this exam. You're only preparing for one exam, civil services exam. There are different stages in that exam. But you're not preparing for prelims separately and mains separately. You're only preparing for one exam. So whatever concept you are preparing, prepare it from both the perspectives, prelims perspective and mains perspective. Actually, you cannot separate that because the prelims paper is also becoming more and more analytical and more conceptual. So all you have to do is go through these PPTs. okay, or PDFs, whatever they are giving you, and watch these videos again if at all you want. You have access to these videos for 2 years, right? So that is the greatest advantage, which offline classes will not give you. Okay. And then try to attempt previous year questions. That is the meaning of revision. Okay, Kusum? And if you still have any more problems, then you can ask me. Okay. So, if like most of you guys have some deficiencies in concepts, like for example, there is one concept in which most of you are having some lack of conceptual clarity, then you can ask me, then I'll take a separate session. I'll repeat that concept again so that you'll all understand this in a better way. Now, forest wealth. The Himalayan ranges are very rich in forest resources. Like while discussing the Himalayan hotspot, we have discussed about the various types of forests or various types of habitats in the Himalayas, right? So these are very, very rich in forest resources. As the altitude increases, the vegetation changes from tropical to alpine. The Himalayan forests provide fuel wood or firewood and a large variety of raw materials for forest based industries. Like, for example, lumbering is a forest based industry. What do you mean by lumbering? Extracting the wood from the plants and then converting that into various shapes and forms, lumbering. And also, many medicinal plants grow in the Himalayas. This is very, very important, guys. Okay. Now, Himalayan region is one of the 36 global biodiversity hotspots. In the Himalayan hotspot, there are 1,748 medicinal plant species. Just look at the richness of Himalayas. 1,748 medicinal plant species. Such a beautiful area, right? Such a wonderful area, right? Now, don't you think that we should all be concerned about the habitat destruction that is happening in Himalayas? Actually, every Indian citizen, irrespective of UPSC aspirant or not, should be concerned about the Himalayan forests. Just look at this number. 1,748 medicinal plant species are found in the forests of Himalayas. Such a wonder, such a beauty. And these are some of the most famous medicinal plant species. I did not include the names because you have all the binomial names, the biological names, and you don't have to keep all that in mind. Trust me. Just look at the images, that's it. Abhishek, how to ask doubt from you apart from the class? I'll just discuss that with the management. Maybe they'll add me in your Telegram group. Okay, we'll just discuss about that. Okay. Now, but with increased commercial collection, unmonitored trade, habitat loss, and unsustainable harvesting, what are the issues? First, increased commercial collection of medicinal plants, unmonitored trade, habitat loss. More and more Himalayan forests are being destroyed for urban expansion or for constructing these tourist hotels and resorts or for agricultural expansion and unsustainable harvesting. Okay, 112 plant species are now threatened. Okay, they have the danger of extinction. And apart from that, there are also several pastures for grazing animals. What do you mean by pasture? A large area covered with green grass. That is the meaning of pasture. Okay, so that is about the forest wealth of Himalayas. Clear, right? Now, agriculture. The Himalayas do not offer extensive flat lands for agriculture. Obviously, the entire terrain, the entire topography there is highly complicated. So, Himalayas do not offer any large flat lands suitable for agriculture. But some of the slopes are terraced for cultivation. What do you mean by terraced? This image. So, here you have the best example of terraced cultivation. So, the slopes are terraced, and in these terraces, rice is grown. So, rice is the main crop on terraced slopes, especially for those slopes where the rainfall is very high. Okay, so if you construct terraces, then you can make the water stay here for a long time. Have you ever seen a paddy field? Rice always requires a level of water. Okay, so that is the reason paddy fields are called man-made wetlands. Clear, right? The other crops are wheat, maize, potatoes, tobacco, and ginger. Okay, just remember as many as you can. You won't get any direct question, but these questions, not these questions, this data will be useful to you while writing answers. Okay. Now, tea is a special type of crop. It can only be grown on hill slopes. So, obviously, tea is cultivated very widely in Himalayas. And apart from that, a wide variety of fruits such as apples, pears, grapes, cherries, peaches are grown in the Himalayas. Apples are very famous, right? The Kashmir region is famous for apples. So, all these are also grown in the Himalayas. Clear, right? So, the next point about significance of Himalayas tourism. So, I don't have anything to explain here. You all know this. Due to their scenic beauty, the Himalayas have developed a large number of tourist spots. The Himalayas offer a cool and comfortable climate when the plains are suffering from the severe heat of the summer. Okay? Millions of tourists from different parts of the country visit Himalayas. And apart from that, Himalayas also have several sacred places. Clear? Next, minerals. The Himalayan region contains many valuable minerals. Coal is found in Kashmir, very important, you must remember this. Apart from that, copper, lead, zinc, nickel, cobalt, antimony, tungsten, gold, silver, limestone, semi precious stones, gypsum, and magnesite are also known to occur in the Himalayas. Okay, so remember as many as you can. And again, you won't be getting any direct questions, but this content will help you to write answers or essay in the mains. Clear? So this is the main problem with Indian geography. You have to, remember a lot of data, lot of facts, lot of names, lot of figures. But the other sections of geography are not like that. For example, geomorphology. We all know why the plates move. And we all know the different types of plate boundaries because that is conceptual, easy to understand, and easy to remember. But now there is a long list of minerals here found in Himalayas. How many can we remember? Very difficult, right? So, guys, with this, I'm done with the Himalayas concept. Okay. So, whatever is very important from UPSC perspective, and whatever UPSC has already asked before, and what UPSC can ask in the future, I've covered all that. Okay. And apart from this, any additional extra information will come to you when you read any standard textbook. There are so many textbooks for geography. You can read anything, it's up to you. Okay. So, with this, we are done with the Himalayas concept. So, we have discussed the different ranges of Himalayas, and then we have discussed the regional division of Himalayas, and then we also have discussed about the importance of Himalayas. Okay. So, what more is there? And how Himalayas formed, that we have discussed in geomorphology. Okay. So, is this clear, guys? So, any doubts anybody has here? Please ask me. So, any doubts anybody has? No doubts? Clear, right? Okay, so yesterday I've sent all the handouts to the institute. Okay, so they will give you by today or maximum by today evening, everything will be uploaded. So, guys, you have time on Sunday to revise through all these handouts. I know that you have to work hard on Sunday also. Just if you work hard for 1 year, your entire life will be golden life. Okay, just for 1 year, don't care much about the weekends, don't care much about the holidays, don't care much about enjoyment. Just for 1 year. Actually, if you fall in love with the subject, learning the subject itself will be enjoyment. Okay. See, actually, this is the main reason why the civil services exam is difficult. It is too difficult for any person to stay focused for 1 year or 1.5 year. Maybe you can stay focused for 1 week or 10 days or 1 month. But staying focused for such a long time is difficult for any person. So that is the reason. Just be curious. Okay. Have that inherent curiosity. Curiosity from inside. You should have that curiosity. You just want to know what is happening inside your country and around your country. You just want to know more and more data, more and more information about your country. You just want to know how the system works. You have the curiosity. Then the civil services exam preparation is not preparation, it is a way of life. Okay. Your way of life for 1 or 1.5 year will determine the rest of your life. Okay. So please go through all these PPTs and ask me doubts on Monday. Okay, because in the next 10 days or 12 days, I'm going to finish off the geography course because Indian geography will be done very fast because I just have to discuss facts because all the mechanisms, principles, laws, concepts that are done in geomorphology, climatology, and oceanography. Of course, while discussing Indian climate, we'll discuss a few more concepts, but Indian geography will be done very fast. Okay? So please ask me doubts. I just don't want to leave you with having doubts in mind. Abhishek, PPTs are not enough, books are essential. Yes, books are essential. Okay. PPTs are also essential. So combine both PPTs and books. At least give one reading. Okay. Read these PPTs multiple times, but at least give standard textbooks one reading. One reading is enough. And if you find any extra point, which I did not discuss in the class, just note it down and revise that once before going to exam. That's it, very simple. Nobody can defeat you. Okay, just hard work for 1 year, guys. That's it. I want to see all of you as bureaucrats. Okay? So now, moving on to the second physiographic division of India. We are done with Himalayas, right? So moving on to the second physiographic division of India, the Indo-Gangetic Brahmaputra Plain. So look at this beautiful image of the Indo-Gangetic Brahmaputra Plain. Okay, so this entire region marked. Okay, that is the Great Plains of Northern India. Okay, so basically it stretches from the mouth of Indus River. Where is Indus River? This is Indus River. So the plain stretches from the mouth of Indus River. What do you mean by mouth? The estuary formed at the place where Indus is falling into the sea. So from the mouth of Indus to the Ganga Brahmaputra delta, roughly, the Indo-Gangetic plain stretches. Okay, so very simple. From the mouth of Indus River in Pakistan till the Ganga Brahmaputra delta, roughly, the Indo-Gangetic Brahmaputra plain stretches. Simple, right? So, did you have a good look at this image? See, actually, just looking at this image will not do the work. You have to study the image. Okay. We all know about Sherlock Holmes, right? So, what is his skill? What is his specialty? He observes carefully. So, you should observe carefully. Okay. Indus River, mouth of Indus River. Then Ganges, Brahmaputra. Just look at the course of Brahmaputra. It is so special. It is so unique. Indus, Ganges, the courses are normal. But look at the course of Brahmaputra. First, it is flowing horizontally. Then, it takes a sharp bend to the south. Okay, and not only that, again it moves horizontally for some distance. Again, it takes a sharp bend south. Okay, And here you have the huge delta that is formed by the rivers Ganga and Brahmaputra. Okay. Okay then. The Indo-Gangetic Brahmaputra plain. So we all know that the plain has been formed due to the depositional work of three major rivers. What are they? The Indus, the Ganga, and the Brahmaputra. Now look at this image again. Indus, Ganga, Brahmaputra, and their tributaries have formed this huge plain. Very, 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 very large plain. Okay. So it is formed by the depositional work of the three major rivers, Indus, Ganga, and the Brahmaputra. And we have discussed about depositional plains in geomorphology. So right now, like, try to understand whatever I'm trying to discuss in the class. And then after this, just watch the video where we have discussed depositional plains. And then go through this PPT. You'll understand everything. Okay. So this is the largest alluvial stretch in the world. Very important point. This is the largest stretch of alluvium in the world, extending for a length of 3,200 kilometers from the mouth of Indus to the Ganga Brahmaputra delta. Okay, so this width is 3,200 kilometers, extending from the mouth of Indus River to the Ganga Brahmaputra delta, roughly. Okay, now the plain is the widest in the west, where it stretches for almost 500 kilometers, and its width decreases in the east. Now again, look at this image. Where is the width maximum? In the west. The width is minimum in the east. Simple. The plain covers a total area of 7.8 lakh square kilometers. And the Great Plain is home to roughly 1/7 of the world's population. Just see how important this plain is and how fertile this plain is. Because only if the land is fertile, only then you can carry out more agriculture. Only when you have surplus agricultural output, only then the human population would be more. All these are interconnected, right? Now, the area of the Great Plain is around 13% of the total area of India. Okay. And the Great Plain produces 50% of the total food grains to feed 40% of India's population. So 50% of the total food grains produced in India are produced in the Great Plain of Northern India. And the Great Plain feeds 40% of the total Indian population. Okay. So just try to remember as many points as you can, because you have to write some factual data also in your answers, especially in your essay also. So factual data, conceptual part. Factual data, conceptual part. That is how you're supposed to write your answers and essay. Okay, a combination of both. Only then your content will be wholesome. Okay, like for example, you're trying to learn about something. Okay, and you open a website. There is a long essay there. How will the essay start? With some introduction points. And the introduction points contain some factual data, right? And then you also have the conceptual part, explaining the mechanism or explaining the laws behind it. Okay, so you have to combine both. See, actually, whatever PPTs I'm giving you, that is more than enough. And in some of the textbooks also, you won't find the content which I am giving you. But anyway, I recommend you to read textbooks, because there might be some additional data, or there might be a different way of explanation, which will make you understand the things in a better way. Okay, so read standard textbooks, because I want your welfare, I want your success. So I strongly recommend you to read textbooks. I'm not like some of the faculty who have ego. They'll simply say that my PPTs are enough, you don't have to read anything. I won't say that, because my primary objective is your success. Okay, now the northern boundary of the plain is well defined by Shivaliks. We all know this, right? To the north of the plain, we have Shivalik Hills. The southern boundary is a wavy, irregular line along the northern edge of the peninsular part of India. So, very simple. The northern boundary of the plain is well defined by the foothills of Himalayas, Shivaliks. But the southern boundary of the plain is an irregular line. It is like this. It is not properly defined. And this boundary is situated along the northern edge of the peninsular part of India. The peninsular part of India contains plateau. Okay, so you can say that the southern boundary is along the northern edge of the plateau, peninsular plateau, and it is not clearly defined. It is not like a straight line, it is a wavy, irregular line. The rivers flowing through this plain have deposited a thick layer of alluvium throughout the length and breadth of the plain. Okay, that is how this plain formed in the first place. So, it is the best example of a depositional plain. We have discussed this, right? In geomorphology, different types of plains. Then we have discussed depositional plain. Now, the thickness of the alluvium deposit varies from place to place. But average, the thickness of alluvium would be somewhere around 1500 meters to 1800 meters. The average thickness of alluvium in the Indo-Gangetic plain. Okay, Kusum, I'll discuss that. Actually, back then I wanted to discuss, but different newspapers were giving different reasons behind that. So now I'll just go through those articles again and I'll discuss that. I told you, right, the reason behind me not discussing that issue was some people are saying it is due to outburst of glacial lake. Some people are saying that it was due to the carving of glacier. So back then we did not have clarity saying that this is the reason due to which this happened. That's the reason I did not discuss that. But now I'll just go through those articles again and I'll discuss the issue on Monday. So in this way, you can ask me to discuss the current affairs also. Just give me 1 or 2 days time. I will prepare a good PPT and discuss that in the class. In this way, I can share some of the burden of your preparation. I can make things easy for you. Okay? Because sometimes I might miss some current affairs. It is not possible for me to follow all the current affairs, right? So if there is any current affair which I missed, just bring it to my notice. I'll prepare PPT and explain that in the class. Okay? And the best thing is that you'll be getting the PPT also. So, origin of the plain. Okay? So, it is universally accepted that this vast plain has been formed as a result of filling of depression lying between the peninsular and the Himalayan regions by the depositional work of rivers coming from these two regions, especially coming from the Himalayas. So, very simple. There used to be a vast depression. Okay. And this depression formed due to tectonic activity. Okay. Now, the rivers coming from Himalayas and also the rivers moving to the north from the peninsular plateau have deposited all the alluvium, silt, in this depression. And finally, you have the Great Plain of Northern India. This is what most of the geologists believe. Okay, so again, nothing in geography is accepted universally. There are different scientists putting forward different theories. There are different opinions, different perspectives, different point of views. Okay, but the most widely accepted one is this. The rivers coming from both the Himalayas as well as the rivers coming from the peninsular plateau have deposited a lot of alluvium, a lot of silt, and filled up this depression. And that is how the vast plain was formed. Clear, right? So it is universally accepted that this vast plain has been formed as a result of filling of depression lying between the peninsular and the Himalayan regions by the depositional work of the rivers coming from these two regions, especially coming from Himalayas. So compared to the peninsular rivers, Himalayas have deposited more silt into the depression. Okay? So basically, due to the depositional work carried by the Himalayan rivers and the peninsular rivers, the vast depression got filled, and that is how this vast plain was formed. So initially, there was a depression between Himalayas in the north and the peninsular plateau in the south. That depression got filled by rivers. Okay, so that is how the plain got formed. As simple as that. Clear, right? Good morning, Praveen. Okay. So I hope you understood this, guys. Origin of the plane. Next, geomorphology of the plane. Let us try to understand the various geomorphological features of the plane. Okay. Now, the following geomorphological features may be noticed on the plane. First, you have something called the Bhabar. See, what are we discussing right now? We are discussing the geomorphology of India. Okay. And we have divided India into 6 physiographic divisions. The same thing we are doing now for the plane. As simple as that. Now, first physiographic division of the Great Plain is Bhabar. And do you remember we have discussed this before? Actually, we have discussed the formation of alluvial fans, and then all the alluvial fans combine together to form alluvial plain. Do you remember we have discussed all this in geomorphology? The same thing we are going to discuss now. Okay? The Bhabar. It is a narrow belt, 8 to 16 kilometers wide, running in east to west direction along the foothills of Shivaliks with continuity from the Indus River to the Teesta River. Okay, so guys, please buy Atlas. Please keep Atlas ready with you. Okay, please try to arrange Atlas by Monday. Okay, because now Indian geography will be clear only if you have Atlas. So please maintain Atlas, guys. Everybody must. Okay. Now it is impossible for me to include all the images. First of all, most of the locations of rivers are not available in the internet. I have searched already. And apart from that, how many images can I include here? It's not so easy, right? So please have Atlas ready with you. So here I said that Bhabar is a narrow belt running continuously from Indus River in the west to Teesta River in the east. If you have Atlas ready with you, immediately you can locate Indus River and Teesta River. That's it. Now you got so much conceptual clarity. Okay? It's all about the visual cues. If you look at images, if you look at maps, you will definitely remember this. Okay? So now let us again come back to this. The Bhabar is a narrow belt, 8 to 16 kilometer wide, running in east-west direction along the foothills of Shivaliks continuously from Indus River in the west to Teesta River in the east. Alluvial fans consisting of gravel and other sediments have merged together to build up the Bhabar belt, which forms the northern boundary of the Great Plain. So very simple. If this is the Great Plain, then the northern boundary is the Bhabar belt, and to the north of Bhabar belt you have Shivaliks. Okay, so Bhabar belt forms the northern boundary of the Indo-Gangetic plain. To the north of Bhabar belt you have the Shivaliks. Now we all have discussed how alluvial fans form. Do you remember? So just imagine this as the mountain range and you're looking at this side view. I cannot draw 3D diagrams here, right? So just imagine that you're looking at this side view. Okay. Now river. It starts coming towards lower, altitudes. From high altitudes, the river flows to low altitudes, low elevations. Now here the slope is very less. So the river lost most of its energy. So the river will deposit all the big large particles here. I hope you're understanding. First visualize, then I'll show you the image. I have the image for this, but first you have to visualize. Okay. You should not become lazy. First you have to do the work here. You have to visualize. And then for getting more clarity, I will show you the image. Now when river is flowing through steep slopes, river has a lot of velocity. River has a lot of energy. So river can carry even large particles also along with it. But here the river is crossing the mountains and finally entering the level land. So here the slope is very less. So the river will lose most of its energy. So river will deposit all the large particles here. That is how these alluvial fans form. And all these alluvial fans will combine together to form the Bhabar belt. As simple as that. Praveen and Abhishek, already having Atlas? Very good. Excellent. So the rest of the people also, please maintain Atlas, guys. Yes, Abhishek. Bhabar, Khadar, and Bhangar. We also have Terai. You missed Terai. Okay. So, did you understand the formation of alluvial fans? Everybody? I've shown you this image, alluvial fans, while discussing geomorphology. Okay. And all these alluvial fans, also called alluvial cones, combine together to form the Bhabar belt. And Bhabar belt forms the northern boundary of the Indo-Gangetic Brahmaputra plain, or simply the Great Plain. Okay. Now, what is the size of particles present in these alluvial cones? All large-sized particles, huge pebbles, gravel, huge rocks, they are present. Okay. Because as soon as the river leaves these mountain slopes and enters the flat land, it loses all of its energy, most of its energy. So immediately, suddenly, it will drop all the large particles and then continue flowing, carrying the small particles. Do you remember we have discussed about bed load, suspended load, dissolved load? Just remember those concepts also. Now, this is how the Bhabar looks like. All large particles were deposited here by the river. Okay. Now, just to get this, you'll understand everything. I showed you this image in geomorphology also. So, rivers coming from high altitudes, and as soon as they reach the level topography, level land, they deposit all the large particles and they start moving forward, continue moving forward. Those large particles form the Bhabar belt, and this is how the Bhabar belt looks like. Now, the porosity of Bhabar is so high that many streams coming from the Himalayas sink and flow underground. See, all these are large rocks. There's a lot of empty spaces between these rocks. Okay. So the rivers simply, not rivers, small streams. The streams simply go underground. They simply sink into these, larger particles, and they start flowing underground. Okay. Now, the Bhabar belt is extensive in the west and comparatively narrow in the east. Okay, again, this you have to keep in mind. Bhabar belt is very thick in the west and comparatively narrow in the east. And this area is not suitable for agriculture. Obviously, just look at all the rocks and pebbles here, very, very large. So they have to be broken into soil through weathering. Only then, agriculture is possible here. Okay. Now, next, we are going to discuss about Terai. So, Terai contains smaller particles compared to Bhabar. Okay. As soon as the river leaves the high elevations, it loses most of its energy and it deposits all the large particles immediately. But the river will still carry forward some, tiny particles, small particles. But as the river keeps on flowing, it keeps on losing its energy. It keeps on depositing particles. So those particles are nothing but Terai. Clear, right? Now, the Terai. It is 15 to 30 kilometer wide, marshy tract. You know the meaning of marshy land, right? It is a 15 to 30 kilometer wide marshy tract in the south of Bhabar, running parallel to it. Okay, so it is like this. First, you have Bhabar, and then you have Terai. This is the Bhabar belt, and this is Terai. It is marked by the re-emergence of the underground streams of the Babar Belt. What happens at Babar Belt? The area is highly porous. There's a lot of tiny spaces, tiny and even large spaces between these rock particles. So many streams will sink and they start flowing underground. So at Terai, they'll again re-emerge to the top. Okay. So Terai is marked by re-emergence of the underground streams of the Babar Belt. So guys, we are only discussing about streams here. Okay, tiny, water currents. We are not discussing about large rivers. They don't sink into the Babar Belt. Okay. Now, the re-emerged water converts large areas into marshy lands covered with thick vegetation, which gives shelter to a variety of wildlife. Now, do you remember we have discussed about Terai and Duar's grasslands while discussing the biodiversity hotspots? Himalayan biodiversity hotspot, we have discussed about Terai and Duars. Okay, we have discussed that Terai and Duars are alluvial floodplain grasslands. The same thing we are discussing here. So the re-emerged water converts large areas into marshy lands covered with thick vegetation, which gives shelter to a wide variety of wildlife. So what do you find in Terai? Either you find thick forests or you find large areas covered by thick grass. And the entire area is marshy. What do you mean by marshy land? It is a wetland. Okay. So basically Terai in northern India and southern Nepal, Duar in northeastern India. All these are alluvial floodplain grasslands. In the name itself, I'm using the word floodplain. That means all these are marshy lands. All these are wetlands. Clear? Now, the Terai is more well developed in the eastern part compared to the west, because the eastern parts of the plain receive more rainfall than the western parts. Okay, so again, this is very, very important. Terai is more developed in the eastern parts of the plain compared to the western parts. Okay, because the eastern parts of the plain receive more rainfall than the western parts. So, any more doubts anybody has? Are you understanding all these? See, the knowledge that we have gained in environment is helping us a lot here. And also the knowledge which we gain in geography will help us a lot in environment also. Okay. We have discussed about Terai and Duars. I told you that all these are alluvial floodplain grasslands, and now that knowledge is helping us here. Okay. Clear, right? Now, most of the Terai land, especially in Punjab, UP, and Uttarakhand, has been converted into agricultural land, which gives good crops of sugarcane, rice, and wheat. Okay. Now, alluvium is of two types, old alluvium and new alluvium. So, Bhangar is old alluvium and Khadar is new alluvium. Okay. So, basically, Terai can be divided into Bhangar and Khadar. Bhangar is old alluvium and Khadar is new alluvium. Now, let us go back to this image for the sake of clarity. Now, this entire thing is Terai. Okay, and Khadar is very close to the river valley and Bhangar is far away from the river valley. So, because Khadar is close to the river valley, every year during monsoon, whenever the river floods, the river will deposit a new layer of alluvium over Khadar. So, that is the reason why Khadar is new alluvium. But Bhangar is far away from Khadar. So, Bhangar is not affected by floodwaters. Floodwaters will not deposit a new layer of alluvium at Bhangar. So, Bhangar is old alluvium, Khadar is new alluvium. As simple as that. Clear, guys? Now, okay, the Bhangar is composed of the old alluvium of the middle Pleistocene age. What do you mean by Pleistocene age? 2.5 million to 11,700 years ago. That is middle Pleistocene age. Okay. Okay, actually that is Pleistocene age, and old alluvium is of middle Pleistocene age. Okay. So Bhangar is composed of the old alluvium of the middle Pleistocene age. Parts of the Bhangar are eroded by every change in the direction of river channels. So sometimes the rivers will keep on changing their courses, right? So when the rivers change their course, then parts of Bhangar will be eroded. Clear? Now the Khadar. Khadar is composed of newer alluvium and forms the floodplains of rivers along the river banks. So, just to get this image, you'll understand everything. So, Khadar forms the floodplains of the rivers, and Bhangar is far away from the floodplains. So, every year during monsoon, whenever the river floods, the floodwater will deposit a new layer of alluvium over Khadar. That is the reason Khadar is new alluvium. But Bhangar is far away from Khadar. Bhangar is not affected by floodwaters. So Bhangar is old alluvium. Clear, right? So Khadar, it is composed of new alluvium and forms the floodplains along the river banks. A new layer of alluvium is deposited by river flood almost every year. These deposits are confined to the vicinity of the present river channels. So these deposits of new alluvium are confined to the vicinity, the surrounding areas of the present river channels, the areas that are close to the present river channels. Clear, right? Abhishek, Bhangar and Khadar are part of Terai, obviously, because Bhabar is huge rocks. You have Bhabar and you have Terai. Okay? Now, what do you mean by Bhabar? That forms the northern boundary of the Great Plain and Shivaliks. Now, Bhabar is all huge rocks, huge pebbles. Next, as you cross that and move towards the south, you find tiny particles, fine particles. That is Terai. Now, Terai is of two types, Bhangar and Khadar. So, here please don't get confused between Bhangar and Bhabar. See, it is like this. The entire Great Plain of northern India is divided into the Bhabar belt and Terai. Okay. Now, Bhabar belt is what? This is Bhabar belt. All huge rocks, huge pebbles, big rocks. This is Bhabar belt. Okay. Now, what is Terai? The rest, everything is Terai. Okay. So, Terai consists of finer particles, small particles of alluvium. Bhabar, large particles, huge stones. Now, Terai is of two types, Bhangar and Khadar. Okay. What do you mean by Bhangar? Old alluvium, Khadar, new alluvium. As simple as that. See, just to get this image, you'll understand everything. Okay, actually from here it is Terai. Okay. So, any more doubts anybody has? Please ask me. Say this image will explain everything. Okay. So, Bhabar, Terai, and the rest of the Great Plains of northern India. See, the Terai particles and the other particles throughout the Great Plain are same. But we can separate Terai if we want because Terai is marshy. Okay. But the other parts of the Great Plains are not marshy. I hope you're understanding. Terai is marshy. So Terai is alluvial floodplain grasslands. Alluvial floodplain grasslands. That is Terai. But after you cross Terai, you find the same size of particles throughout the plain. But you don't find marshy lands. So in this way, if at all you want to separate Terai, you can separate Terai. Okay. So you can say that first you have Bhabar, then you have Terai, then you have the rest of the plain. In the rest of the plain, you have both Bangar and Khadar. Okay. Yes, Praveen. More to the south, more fine particles. Clear, right? So please keep Atlas ready with you guys. That is very, very important. Please keep Atlas ready with you. Okay? Because from now, it's all about places, 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 places. Maybe the topics, whatever we are discussing now, are easy. But when we start discussing about rivers, rivers, tributaries, and all that, it becomes very difficult. And also, we have to discuss about the coastal plains. Okay, then I have to describe the eastern coastal plain, stretches from this point to this point. And most of those images and maps are not available in the internet. So you have to keep Atlas ready with you. Okay, I'll try my best to include as many images as possible. But sometimes the images are not available. So you have to keep Atlas ready with you. That is very important. And not only coastal plains, when we discuss about mines and minerals, we'll look at so many different places. So many new names will come. Then you have to point out all those in your atlas immediately. Okay? So, atlas is very important, especially for students having geography optional. Atlas is like, priceless, very, very precious. Okay? So, please keep atlas with you. Only then you'll be able to understand the rest of the topics. Okay? So, again, we have class at 2 o'clock. Okay? So, let me just stop it here for today. And let us meet again at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then let us discuss environment. And today I will be finishing off the concept of international conventions, treaties, and organizations. And from tomorrow, not tomorrow, tomorrow is Sunday, right? Actually, I won't be able to take class tomorrow. Okay, actually, last Sunday we have taken classes, right? But tomorrow I won't be able to take class. On Monday, environment, we are going to start India's laws and policies, which is again a very, very important topic. Okay, guys. So let me just stop it here for today and let us meet again at 2 o'clock in the afternoon for environment. Okay. So thank you so much and let us meet in the afternoon.